the uprisings in North Africa and the Middle East have taken hundreds of lives, and it is clear that human rights of thousands have been violated. Organizations such as Human Rights Watch are monitoring the violence with representatives on the scene. Our next guests are Robert Bernstein. He is the founder of Human Rights Watch, and also with us, Colonel Richard Kemp. He is the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. And they are announcing the creation of a new watchdog group. It's called Advancing Human Rights. Gentlemen, great to have you with us on Bloomberg. And Robert Bernstein, why don't you tell us, what is this new organization, Advancing Human Rights? Why do we need a new human rights organization?
That's a very good question. I think we need it for two reasons. One, to get back to the basics of human rights, particularly in the Middle East, which is the Universal Declaration, things like free speech, particularly women's rights, of course, religious freedom, things that human rights organizations know about, and also opening up, trying to do that by getting people in those countries to be able to fight for their own rights rather than telling them what to do from afar. The other reason is that human rights organizations have moved away from that, particularly in the Middle East, and declared themselves to be experts on the laws of war, fighting wars, how to fight wars, which weapons to use. And in doing that, I think the other side doesn't care about those rules. I don't think they could talk to Hamas about the rules of war. And what has happened is that they have come down very hard on democratic armies in Afghanistan and Iraq, and certainly the Israeli army, and I think made many wrong statements, created many wrong decisions, and my feeling was we should go to military experts to learn how to fight wars and not take advice from human rights organizations. And Colonel Kemp has come out and spoken about that, and I think you'll learn a lot more from him.
Well, Colonel Kemp, come in on this topic, because it seems as though we're at a point in warfare where there's a dichotomy. There are troops in uniform from the United States operating in Britain, in Afghanistan. In uniform, we all understand what soldiers are trained to do. But the adversaries, they're not in uniform. They often mix in the civilian population. What has been your experience with fighting this kind of what they call asymmetrical warfare?
Asymmetrical counterinsurgency warfare. This is a classic, incredibly complex case that we're facing with our own forces, British, American and Afghanistan today. The Israeli forces themselves is one of the main subjects of the new group we're talking about, who are all trying to fight extremists who have an intention to lure us to attack their civilian population. They use their civilian population as a weapon, and they melt in and they fight from within the civilian population. They try to get us to attack the civilian population, both to protect them and also for their own, or for adverse publicity for our forces. And the thing that concerns me, I think, which Bob has touched upon, is the emphasis that some human rights groups have placed, including the United Nations Human Rights Council, on breaches of the laws of war by armies, and they've focused on the Israeli forces, which I believe are completely unjust. I think they've thrown completely the wrong perspective on it. The Israelis, in the same way as the British and the Americans in Afghanistan, place a huge emphasis on protecting civilian lives. And might I say, just briefly, I fought and served alongside American forces on many occasions. I've been extremely proud to do that. And American forces today in Afghanistan are fighting extremely courageously and extremely hard in very difficult circumstances. What they don't need is human rights groups on their backs pointing out where they're going wrong without the proper expertise to do so.
Well, come in on this topic, Bob Bernstein, because you've described how the organization that you're forming now is going to really try to look after the human rights of individuals and not make judgment calls about armies.
There's nothing wrong with making judgment calls about armies if the people who make those judgments know what they're doing. I mean, if armies do bad things, the colonel would first say that. They're human and they make mistakes. But the fact is, I've spent time with the people who are writing the codes for the Israeli army, the U.S. Army, very careful codes on the protection of civilians. And nobody wants to kill civilians. I mean, it is not as though human rights organizations are going to protect civilians and the rest of us don't care. We care tremendously. There's nothing I would be rather doing now than bringing computers into Gaza.
I do think human rights groups should be focusing much more of their effort on looking at armies which are in closed societies, not armies like the Israeli army, the British army, the American army, which are accountable to democratically elected governments. They expend far too many resources looking at those armies which craft their rules of engagement and their adherence to military law in a way that is unheard of in many societies. And they should be focusing their effort much more on that than wasting their time doing too much probing into democratic armies which are subject to the laws of war and to the accountability to courts.
Well, I can see this is going to be a topic that we're going to have to spend much more time on in the future. I hope you'll grace us with your presence again. Bob Bernstein, I want to thank you very much. New organization, Advancing Human Rights. Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you very much, former British commander, troops in Afghanistan. Thank you very much.